you hear our cry? Lord, would you heal our land? That every eye will see, that every heart will know, the one who took our sin, the one who died and rose. And when your kingdom comes, and when at last you call, we'll rise to worship you alone. Spirit of God, breathe on your church, pour out your presence, speak through your word. We pray in every nation, Christ be known, our hope and salvation, Christ alone. How firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in his excellent word. What more can he say than to you he has said? To you for refuge, to Jesus and fled. So fear not, fear not, I am with thee. Oh, be not dismayed, for I am thy God, and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by my gracious omnipotent hand. Oh, when through fiery trials thy pathway shall, my grace all sufficient shall be thy supply. The flame shall not hurt thee, I only design thy dross to consume, and thy gold to refine. The soul that on Jesus doth lean for repose, I will not desert to his foes. That soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no, never, no, never forsake. He will never, no, never, no, never forsake. Let this be our prayer. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. You may be seated.
Well, this is the last session, and you guys have been amazing in your just attention and how much you've I think, grasped from what I hear on breaks talking to you. I think this would be a good opportunity. In fact, I'm not going to go long right now. I had to come to Jesus this morning about 5 a.m., and I had one thing in mind, and I just really sensed that the Lord say, You know, this afternoon, by the time you get up there, they're going to have heard enough. Was he right? Because if you don't think so, tell him. But it might be a good chance for us to air maybe some of what you've heard, anything in the last day right here that has really stood out in your mind. Just sign and say, boy, this was a really important takeaway for me. Let me just hear it. Now's a good time to give voice to it. Sometimes when you articulate it, you force yourself to say, no, that is what I learned. So let's try it. What'd you hear that you grasped and hung on to? Santis, thank you, man. Thank you. Go ahead.
One of the things is that the issue is that we have not let go of the sacred, but we added things to it. That's going to create technical.
Wow.
Question to really ask the question whether I added things to the sacred.
Yeah. Oh, good. Thanks. What else did you hear? Yeah, Cammie?
That's really simple. I think I have thought of discipleship of I need to be poured into by someone else in order to disciple someone else, when really I need to get busy being discipled by Jesus and making that my priority in my life, and the rest will flow more easily.
Boy, that's well said. Yeah, really well. Yeah, thank you. What else y'all hear? Yeah, Bob?
Part of discipleship for me, I came to Christ late. I was 34, so I have to be almost undiscipled by things that I was discipled by in the process of being discipled.
Yeah, I think I heard Matt talk about unlearning. I think it was. Yeah, it was. Or Jason, someone. Yeah.
I think one of the things that really stirs my heart is if we just fall deeper and deeper and deeper in love with God, how can we not love other people the way He loves us?
Yeah.
And we should. We should come back.
Yeah. 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 One or two more.
This one is about unity in the body of Christ. How can you and I be reconciled with others if we are not first reconciled to God?
Yeah. Boy, seems like it starts there. Joanne did a beautiful job making that clear. Didn't she? My goodness. Anyone else? Before we transition? Yeah.
I think for me, Pastor, it's just that I was making it so hard, and this whole seminar let me know it's doable. I can do this. You know what I mean?
Perfect. That's beautiful, man. Beautiful. Yeah. Judy, you were going to say something?
I think that's the place to start.
Okay. You stole her thunder, man. That's good. That's good. I sensed as we come to the close of this that I need to shift the subject a little bit to more personal approach, if I can. If you'll allow me, I don't really have the right to do this with a lot of you because I don't know you that well, but if you'll allow me to spend the last few moments, only a few, speaking pastorally more than as a preacher. Or even as a teacher. I'm not so much a thinker right now on how disciples are made, but I'm feeling in my soul right now that whenever I come to events like this, I always hear things and I learn things, and then I go back to the situation that I'm at. And because my circumstances are what they are, my personality is what it is, it always feels like there are limitations to what I can do, to what I just heard. Am I resonating at all? So I sometimes think if I had your circumstances, or if not, I at least had your personality, then maybe I would be a little more bold in a moment when I needed to be. If I had the way that you administrate in things, then I would think I would be able to pull this off. But really, I'm not sure. Some of you in the room are going to walk out in a few moments and you're going to say, that does it. I'm going to call that meeting and I'm going to start that program and I'm going to take the chance to do this. But if you don't mind, let me speak to the rest of you. The ones of you that will walk out and say, I'm not really sure that I want a movement in my church. Something that I can't control might be kind of uncomfortable, or a whole bunch of conversations with strange people, or even if I know them, that I might not be real comfortable with. I don't know if I can do this. I was teaching a preaching class a few years ago, and the student got up and halfway through the sermon, he stopped. He was telling, I remember it like it was yesterday, he was telling the story about an alligator with his mouth open and a bird landing inside the alligator's mouth. That's what he said. He said, so the alligator has his mouth open like this, and the bird lands inside on the teeth of the alligator, but the alligator does not close his mouth. Do you know why he doesn't do that? There was a long pause in the sermon. I was in back grading. Suddenly, Chris just looked up and said, I can't be here anymore. And he gathered the stuff out of his bag, put the rest of it in, put the bag on his back, and went quickly out of the class. Class all turned around to look at me, like, what are you going to do? And like a leader, I just went, gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I said, somebody go get him, and I'll take over the class. So by the time I got up to the class, the student had ran out after the young man, and he was out there 3 or 4 minutes, and he finally came back in the class, and he just goes, Prof, he's gone. He's nowhere in the building. It's like he evaporated. So class ended about 20 minutes after that, and I went out to the hallway and was talking with a few students, getting ready to go to the office. In comes Chris. He'd come back. He'd left the building. So ashamed. And he said, I'm really sorry about what I just did, but I just don't have it in me to do what you want me to do. I said, what do you think I want you to do? He said, well, the class is preaching. I presume you want me to preach. I said, yeah, that would not be a bad idea since this is the class, you know. He said, I can't do this, man. I'm not cut out to do this. I said, well, maybe you're not cut out to preach. Do you ever see yourself standing in front of people, talking to people about what God has laid on your heart? He said, I do not. I said, do you ever see yourself in a small group of 10 to 12 people, maybe your own age, Bible on your lap, explaining to them something that God has just shown to you? He said, I cannot do that. I said, do you see yourself in a group of 3 to 4 people with something on your heart that you really want to share, and you're not even sure how, do you see? He said, I do not see myself doing that. What should I do? I said, well, first, tell me, why does the alligator have his mouth open? I have many times heard or sensed Chris's fear in me. I cannot do what you want me to do. I don't have it in me. So I want to spend the next few moments talking to you, just half of you, about what it means to be a reluctant leader. Organizational experts have identified between 9 and 12 different types of leaders. I identify 2. There are leaders who are by nature assertive, and there are leaders who are by nature reluctant. God calls both of them into ministry. And it seems on some days like the assertive ones enjoy it more. Because ministry in America is a very extroverted calling. It requires from a person skills that extroverts have and introverts are not good at. So if you're an introverted person, as I am, you spend so much of your time in ministry trying to work around what you consider a deficiency. And it makes you a reluctant leader. I want to argue for a few moments that that is not a curse. It's a calling. And we have to embrace it. And we have to go back to our places, operating in the way that God has called us to operate. Because if we can find a way to do this, half of you, there will be a tremendous amount of freedom when you go back. You won't feel like you have to make anything happen. You can follow. I learned from Matt in the first session, even if you're an assertive leader, you'll spend half of your ministry chasing God. God will do something. You don't know what he's doing. You got to chase him and try to corral it and organize it without killing it, because he's already got it started. You don't have any idea what he's doing. What you'll do later is come along and try to figure out what he did, package it so you can tell people how you did it. And the truth is, you don't know. I have found in leadership, the dirty little secret is that most leaders do not feel as secure as they appear to be. There's an underside. We know where our weaknesses are and how to get around them. I'm asking you to embrace them. For models of the two types of leaders, the assertive and the reluctant. The assertive, think of David. The reluctant, think of Moses. David, you know, he goes to bring food to the front lines. 1 Samuel 17, he sees 9-foot something behemoth taunting the Israelites. Kid's 12 years old. He basically listens to the argument and says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Talk about armies like this. And it says, when the armies of Israel heard it, they trembled and they ran in the other direction. David don't have that gene. He stands there and says, I want him. So finally, after coaxing the king Saul to give me a shot at this guy, you can picture this 12-year-old kid standing out there with nothing but a sling. A guy's well armored, and he's looking at this guy thinking, I like my chances. I'm thinking, I don't. I like his. So you contrast that with Moses. God comes to Moses and says, my people have been captivated for 400 years. It's time to break them out. You're the man. Moses said, who am I? Call Aaron. God says, well, you can call who you want. Well, this is what I'm doing. And you're the guy I picked. So I put those two together. David, who is that guy? I'll kick his butt. And Moses, who am I? Call somebody else. And I found my calling in Moses. Here's a few things I've learned. One is the success of any venture or organization is disproportionate to one person, even if that person feels afraid. Never forget that. We can talk about building teams, we can talk about structure and organization, but in my bones, I believe that God blesses churches largely because there is one person in place interceding for that church. It is not always the pastor. And that person's work acts as an umbrella that keeps crap off of that congregation. So the word that we're looking for here is not talent or ambition. The word is favor. I believe God favors certain people because He can. And when He does, the fix is in. Every year I get asked by students at the halfway through the year if they could do an interview. That's one of the joys of working in a college church. You get to fulfill some students' requirements for a class. What a rich opportunity this is. By now, I've memorized all the questions. They'll come in, sit down, I'll say, don't say anything. I'm just going to unload 20 minutes. I've got it down to 15. The last question is always the same. The last question is, if there was one piece of advice, oh, this is novel, that you would like to give me, a young minister getting ready to go into ministry, what would that advice be? Holy cow, you know where you can go with that? I think without fail, I've always given one answer to that. Seek the favor of God. Whitey Ford said, I'd rather be lucky than good, because when you're lucky, good can't beat you. I'd rather have favor than anything else, because when you have it, nothing else can beat you. So find out what it takes to get the favor of God. The good answer to that is, I have no idea. I can tell you how to blow it, how to lose it. I can't tell you how to get it. All I know is that there are certain types of people that God tends to favor. People that are poor in spirit. People that have hungry hearts for Him. People with laser focus on what they're doing. And even after that, I don't know why He picks them. But I think He does. This is a Wesleyan church, but I'll just say it. I think God has favorites, period. I don't know how you get to be on that list, but if you ever get on that list, I like your chances, whatever your personality. Seek the favor of God, because the success of any venture or organization is disproportionate to one person. Second observation that comes from Moses' life. God can use you even without your consent. This is a beautiful idea for me, because as Americans, we tend to think all about agreeing with God and helping God. Be it unto me as you have said, Mary said. And the Lord must have thought, oh, I will. So, rather than think about all that you're going to do to agree with God, think about all that God has already done in your life before you even knew it. Because it's possible that that's where your calling is. It's simply identifying the things that God has been doing in your past to groom you. So you're in ministry, great. But there may be a place or an avenue of ministry that is specific to your calling and you haven't found it yet. Look back, not forward, and find out. So Moses is in the desert, and there's a fight between Egyptians, and Moses steps in to break up the fight. And they said, who put you, Lord, over us? He has no idea in this moment God is grooming him for 40 years later, when he'll need him on the backside of the mountain. Which leads to the third observation. God can call you out of your weakness, just like He can call you out of your strength. One of the shifts in ministry, and I only speak like an old man. One of the shifts in ministry among the 20-somethings today is that the calling is often asset-based. So we like to think about our calling as the place where our passion and our talent and the world's need all intersect. That is a valid way for someone to be called. Thousands are, and they have fruitful ministries. The other way is not the way of passion, it's the way of obedience, where God comes to a person and says, this is what I want you to do. And you say, this is not my passion. I am not good at that. Who am I? Said Moses. And the Lord said, who are you? Who am I? I am that I am. That's what you tell them. You are what you've always been. But I am the eternal one. In that moment, Moses finds himself called not out of his passion, but out of his obedience. For him to walk away and do something else is not just to wreck his life, it is to act in disobedience to what God has called him to do. When I was 17 years old in Day Memorial Chapel in Hastings, I was called. I grew up with a stuttering problem. I still stutter in private conversations. It's embarrassing. And so when God called me to preach that day, and I knew it was that day, I said, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. My dad's a preacher. I'm going to be a bad sequel. Now with this problem, as an introvert, he'll call me in front of people. I can make a public fool out of myself. This is ridiculous, but I had no choice. I did not say yes because I had a vision for it. I said yes because if I wouldn't have, it would have been disobedience to God. And at that stage in my life, I'm 17. He's just flat bigger than me. I didn't have many options. Then I ran into people that were called out of their strengths, and I noticed the difference. When you're called out of your strengths and your assets, and things don't go well in the ministry, it can ruin you. But when you're called out of your weakness and your deficiencies and you fail in something, well, you were supposed to. It doesn't ruin you. You just go, can't leave. I'll stay at it. Because this is what God called me to do. I know that for sure. He didn't call me to get it right and didn't call me to build great things. He called me to do the thing I'm doing, however good I am at it. And that is a fundamentally different call. I'm not saying it's the only call, but it might be yours. You might need to stop looking for your passion and start listening for the voice and then jump on it. Whatever he calls you to do, just do it. 4, I learned from Moses' life that you can lead people who don't like you. Oh, and Moses is always wanting out of this. That's one of his patterns, you know. Whenever things go bad, he goes, Lord, why did you call me? And all these ornery people. So he's saying that in Exodus chapter 16. He's standing out there with Aaron at his side, and the people are grumbling in Exodus chapter 16. It's a powerful phrase. And it says, while the people grumbled, they looked into the distance, and there was the pillar and the cloud. So here's the guy feeling terribly inadequate. He's angry at all the people he's trying to lead. He says, man, I would bail. But everybody knows, however bad he is and however much we don't like him, there is the pillar and the cloud. We will have to deal with that. It might be that the pillar in the cloud is connected to the guy we don't like. So my first church, people would come to me and say, how come you're so negative? Well, it's because I was. And they were putting books by Robert Schuller in my car. Subtle, you know, I'd come back to my car and there's books by Robert Schuller. I'm going, ow. I would have board meetings and they would say, you know, we got 2 new people coming, Pastor. Church had 21 people in it. And they said, if you lose these people, I'm not making this up. This is a direct quote. Not that I remember or anything. If you lose these people, we're going to kick you in the butt. I just went. One of the board members said, you're talking like his mother now. I said, no, my mother never talks like that. And there was an unholy hush. I went home, called my dad, and I said, I don't know how to deal with these people. I'm not, and I remember my dad said, Steve, the problem is that they don't like you. You keep thinking you can fix stuff. You can't fix it. They don't like you. Deal with it. I said, well, what am I going to do? He said, you're going to have to learn how to lead people who don't like you. I said, how am I going to do that? He says, you'll have to learn to lead from weakness, not from strength. Now, you know this intuitively. If you put yourself at a table with other powerful people and you power up, you cause every other powerful person at the table to power up and fight you. They don't have a choice. They ain't going to take a knee to you. But if you power down and you go, I need your help. I'm not good at this. I have a lot to learn. Immediately, the most powerful people at the table will ante up to help you. So we have to learn to lead people who don't like us, but from an entirely different paradigm, a paradigm of I need help. I don't have the answers. I'm not good at this. When we moved to College Church, I learned in the first week that I was here, whenever you call a meeting in this church, whoever you are, you're not the smartest guy in the room. And if you think you are, you're the only one who thinks you are. They're on to you. You don't have to have great ideas. You're sitting in the room of great ideas. You just have to mine it out of them. They have great ideas, and they don't know it. So you got to find ways to pull it out of them. But you do it with weakness. You pull it out with questions, not with statements. Fifth, your greatest impact can come from your absence, not your presence. If you're a reluctant leader, you find it hard to move into circles and just spread your personality around. You will have to do it more often than you like. You'll have to come early, listen close, and stay late. You'll have to be there at the facility after everyone else is gone, so you have a chance to see people. You'll have to seek people out in atriums or in boardrooms. You'll have to make an initiative that's uncomfortable for you. But keep in mind, it's possible that your greatest impact will come not from times when you are with people, but from times when you are away from them, as Moses did, interceding for the people. A ministry of absence is a ministry of intercession. So even though we're not with them, we carry the burden and the weight of our people on our shoulders, and we literally get in between God and our people. until we can speak to our people for God. And then we can speak to God for our people. But that sometimes is your absence, not your presence. 6, I learned from Moses that you can lead something without making it happen. The American model of leadership is aggressive. It's take charge. The leader has a vision. He casts the vision, makes quick and decisive decisions, and then people get in behind him. He's charismatic. He's strong-willed. But I hear from Moses that there is a cloud that settles over the tabernacle, and until the cloud moves, you don't move. So you're the leader, but you're not in charge. So this is learning how to wait proactively and aggressively for those seasons in the life of our people when God says it's time to move. To move when he says sit, or to sit when he says move, is to err in both ways. And if you're an assertive leader, you will tend to move when he says sit. And if you're reluctant, you'll tend to sit when he says move. But either way, you're not in charge. God is. 7, almost done. You can have a vision for something that you're not supposed to do. In Deuteronomy, God calls Moses to the top of the mountain and says, look out over at the promised land. You like what you see? That's really something, says Moses. Well, good, says the Lord, because you ain't going. Leaders today tend to have visions only as long as their lifetimes. So that by the time we're done, the whole thing's done. Maybe God wants to give us a vision for our church after we're done. One of our friends, Tim, over here, he pastored a small countryside church. Remember Tim? He had a guy come to him, found out he had cancer. Been in the church his whole life, chairman of the board. He said to Tim one day, he said, I want this church to be here and open for my funeral. Tim said, then you'll have to think about this church after your funeral. He said, sir, if you don't have a vision for this church after your funeral, there won't be a church at your funeral. God needs to give us a picture of things that we can't do because we're not going to be alive long enough to do it. It is too big, and it requires more firepower than any one of us has alone, which leads to the last one. I learned from Moses that as a reluctant leader, you can feel like a failure and still succeed. I learned you can't listen to your own voice. You can't trust it. You'll have to listen to God and your people. 2 out of 3 wins. If God says it was good, your people are digging it, you don't matter. And if God says it was good and you think it was good, forget for the day what your people said. They matter, but not today. 2 out of 3 wins. You'll have to learn to listen for other voices to affirm you if you're a reluctant leader, because you tend to always feel incapable or insufficient. Last story. I got a call some years ago to go down to North Carolina to do a district conference. It was the night from hell. I flew in, and I was supposed to, I thought, get picked up, and they were going to drive me to this conference center where I had to speak. Did I mention I was in for one night, and then they were flying me out that night? For the record, they don't ask you to come in for one night and hit a single or a double. They want one off the facing of the third deck. I don't have a sermon like that. So I spent 2 months writing this puppy, and I got it all ready. And I fly into North Carolina, and I'm waiting at the airport. I'm starting making calls. I made 11 calls before I got hold of somebody. And they said, "Oh, we ain't supposed to pick you up. You're supposed to rent a car and drive." What? Well, yeah, you got to rent a car and get there. So I walked over to the desk, and I said, "Do you guys have any cars left?" They said, "We have one. It's the Ford Focus." Now look at this body. This ain't going to happen in a Ford Focus. I said to the guy, "I got to be in such and such a town at a convention center. You ever heard of that?" He goes, "I know where that's at." I said, "How far am I from there?" He said, "You're an hour and a half away." It was 5:30. It started at 7. So I got in this little Ford Focus. It's a 4-banger, and I got that thing going 80 miles an hour until a traffic jam. With a flip phone, I do not have Google Maps. Google Maps didn't have Google Maps. So I called back to the office, and I said, "Jackie, you got to figure this out, man. I'm supposed to be there like an hour, and there is no way I'm going to make it." She's looking for different routes, finally got me around a different route. I got back on the highway, and I had my notes on the steering wheel like this, and that little 4-cylinder was just going, I was flying down, had my briefcase open, had my jeans on. I'm looking at my notes going 80 miles an hour. I finally pulled into the parking lot, and as I got out, I grabbed my jacket and put it over my back. And I was meeting people going into the convention center. And they said, "Who are you?" I said, "You'll see in about 10 minutes. So I went flying into the conference center. I went into this men's bathroom. So I changed my clothes. I go into the handicap stall. And I start changing my clothes. I put my phone on speaker. I call my wife and I said, "Baby, you got to pray. We have a disaster going on." She said, "What is wrong?" I said, "Everything is wrong. This is not going well." About that time, there was a knock on the door, and they said, "Hey, you need to do a sound check." I said, "You want me to have pants on? You better wait." So I finished getting dressed. I went out there. We did a sound check. And they said, "Okay, now here's how it's going to go. After the choir sings, we're not going to introduce you. You just get up and speak." Got it. So I went over and I sat in the second row. And the choir was coming onto the platform to sing. And while they were coming onto the platform, this ever happened to you? The Lord's, I think it was the Lord, a strong sense in my heart where he said, "You know that sermon that you spent 2 months writing? You can't do that." I remember the internal struggle inside. I was going, "This is ridiculous, man. Put it down, put it down." I mean, if there's anything introverts do, it's over-prepare. And I couldn't put it down. Just before I left the office, I'd randomly grabbed 3 sermons and shoved them in the bag, never looked at them. And the impulse got stronger and stronger and stronger. In fact, as the choir was finishing their song, I knew for sure that I could not do that sermon. But I didn't know what one I was supposed to do. So as the choir was finishing, I was arguing out loud with God. And just as the choir stopped singing, I was still talking out loud to God. And I said, "You've got to be kidding me." But the way it was timed was the choir hit that last note. And what everybody heard was, "You've got to be kidding me," from the speaker in the front row. So at this point, I reached into my bag, I grabbed I know not what, and I pulled it out. And I went walking onto the platform, and I was looking through stuff. I'm thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I laid it down. I didn't even look at the people. I looked over for a few seconds, and then I lied through my teeth. I looked up and said, "Really glad to be with you here tonight." I was lying, man. I would rather have been anywhere than with those people. I preached a truly mediocre, and that's a raise. A really bad sermon. And I got to the end of the sermon, and I didn't know where I was going, and I finally said, "Look, here's all I'm saying to you. If God's calling you tonight, whatever God's calling you to do tonight, just say yes. Let's pray." I prayed. And when I said amen, I walked off the platform. Left the DS sitting there, the general sitting right over there. Didn't do an altar call, did nothing. So one of the officials came up, fumbled around, tried to think about how am I going to save a truly bad sermon. And he called the meeting back to order and left us in prayer, and then everybody sort of just kind of mumbled and left out. I drove back to the airport, talked to my sister on the phone. She said, "How'd that go?" I said, "This is the worst night of my life." "What happened?" I told her what happened. She said, "So what did God say to you afterwards?" I said, "He didn't say anything." "What? He didn't confirm this?" "No." And by now I was angry. I said, "No, he didn't confirm this. He puts me on a stage in front of a bunch of ministers, changes the dadgum sermon, and never has the decency to even say, 'Attaboy.' You didn't hear anything." I didn't hear anything. She said, "Who knows what God is doing?" I said, "Yeah, who knows what God is doing?" Flew back home, and I continued my business. 2 years later, I'm sitting in a flame class at lunch. This guy comes walking up and sits across the table from me, and he says, "Hey, you were the speaker in North Carolina one night, weren't you?" I said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "You know, that sermon you preached that night, it wasn't that great of a sermon, you know." I said, "Yeah, thought did cross my mind." He said, "You never gave an altar call." "No, I didn't." He said, "Why didn't you give an altar call?" I said, "Sir, I could not get out of there fast enough. I was so humiliated." You know what he said? I won't forget it. He said, "Sir, I was knocking chairs over to get down to that altar." Really? He said, "I'd been wrestling with a call for 2 years. And then you get up there at the end of a truly mediocre sermon and you say, whatever God's calling you to do, just say yes. That's it. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" I said, "No, sir, I don't." He said, "It wrecked me." That's what it did. It wrecked me. But it wrecked me into the ministry. He said, "I'm in ministry." He said, "I'm going into ministry. It's why I'm at these flame classes, because I believe God has called me." He got out of his job as an engineer and said, I'm going to become a full-time minister." Yogi Berra once said, "In a word, you never know." But he's right, isn't he? You never know. You never know what you're doing. You call a meeting, it goes terrible for you. You go home and say, I failed miserably. I'll never do that again. You never know. You got up and preached a truly mediocre sermon and you said nobody was moved, but you never know. You started to disciple 4 or 5 people and they walked out of that discipleship session exactly the way that they came in, you said. Only you never know. You prayed with someone at an altar and counseled them through a difficult situation. You've walked alongside of them, or you will, for months and never see them move an inch, you say. Only you never know. God can take what feels like failure and make it success. The end of Moses' story. Moses' story in Deuteronomy is like this. And of all the leaders Israel had, there was never one like Moses. I bet you Moses wished he'd have known that earlier. Eric, how do you want to end? You want me to pray? You want to lead us in prayer? What do you want to do, man? You wrap us up. Love you guys.
You never know what God's going to ask you to do, and you never know how Steve's going to end. Just take it through a couple quick announcements. We talk a lot, we've been talking a lot lately around here about being sent out, about at the end of our gathering time to make sure that we are being sent out into the world. And we're going to do that together here in just a minute. But before we do that, during this last session, you should have received an email in your inbox that is a survey about the festival. It would be incredibly helpful to us if you would fill that out honestly and openly. Help us make these better and just more useful going forward. So I would encourage you to take the time to fill that out. During the last break, you should have gotten one of these on the table, and we heard people saying, I don't know what this is. Just recently, our worship arts team here at the church, after 2 years of painstaking labor, finally finished putting together a CD of some of the songs that we use here. I believe the arrangements are available as well. I might be speaking out of turn here. You can talk to Daniel about that later if you want. We would just encourage you, if you'd like to have one of those, you can access that in most of the places where you buy music, and on Spotify. You can listen to it for free if you're, if you're like me and you're too cheap to buy music. Feel free to do that. Here's what I want us to do. A lot of times when we send people out, someone will stand in the front and we'll either pray over you or we'll give you a sending. What I would like you to do is just around your table, and maybe even split up into smaller groups of 2 or 3, maybe just share, here is one main thing that I heard from God. And here is what I think He might be asking me to do. And then pray for each other, send each other out with that encouragement. And when you're done, you can be free to go. If you want to talk, I would encourage you to do it out in the atrium so the people who are still finishing up here can do that. But just spend some time praying for each other and sending each other out onto this mission of God that He has called us to. Okay?